Kelsey.
Yeah.
Okay. Countdown. Okay, good morning, everyone. I will now call the hearing to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. This morning I will be chairing the hearing. My name is Robert Hutchings. On my direct left is Ms. Nevitt. On my far left is Mr. Buss. Representing the Assessment and Taxation Department, we have Ms. Martins this morning, and we have Kelsey as our secretary. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by this Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with this board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following their swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by cross-examination by the appellant first, and then the panel, and then the appellant's testimony, followed by cross-examination by the assessor first, and then the panel again. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decision. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And please, can everybody turn off their cell phones during the hearing? Thank you. Thanks, Kelsey. Morning, Mr. Smith, Ms. Martins. Good morning. Kelsey, could you swear in the parties, please?
Would you like to swear in on the Bible or affirm with us? Could you please state your name?
Jennifer Martins.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. On the Bible or affirm with us?
Bible's fine.
Could you please state your name?
Trevor Smith.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kelsey. First property on the docket today is 50 Bison Drive, and we're dealing with a 2020 realty appeal. Ms. Martin, when you are ready, please.
This is roll number 03091611600, 50 Bison Drive. We have an assessed value as of reference date April 1st, 2018 of $34,047,000. Its classification is residential 2, and the liability status is taxable. This is a 7-story building built in 2016. We have the land area at 115,294 square feet and a plan area of 26,080 square feet with a gross floor area of 181,144 square feet. If we go on to page 3, we have some rental comparables. And on page 4, we have the income workup. We have a suite count of 170 with a monthly rent per suite at $1,474. This gives us a potential gross income of $2,857,510. We have a vacancy loss at 2.4%. We have the expenses at 38.96% with a cap rate of 5%. This gives us our final valuation of $34,047,000. I have attached the mailer at the end, and as usually, we have our cap rate analysis, or cap rate description on page 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
Just very briefly, the valuation is model driven, I'm assuming,
Yes, it is.
for all points, income, expense, cap rate, et cetera.
Yes.
The income expense that is attached at the end does indicate a fairly high vacancy loss. Is that fair to say? The gross rent potential of $2,915,000 less $137,000 vacancy roughly.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Smith, what page are you referring to?
I'm sorry,
In the
I
assessor's
didn't.
brief,
I
yeah.
should point out the page number. That would be page number 8.
8, okay, thank you.
And those are all of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, any questions of the assessor?
Yeah, I do have some questions about your comparables, please,
Okay.
on page 3. So you've provided 3 comparables. They're smaller, I see, than the others. I'm not sure where Dover Court Drive is. It's probably the closest in size.
Dover Court is off of Gilbury, close to Waverly. So it's between Waverly and Kenniston.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Okay, they have, the comparables you've provided, with the exception of Comp 2, they're of a different construction class.
Mhm.
Does that make a difference in terms of how they are assessed, or?
It goes more by, we aren't doing a cost valuation, it is an income valuation, so
Mhm.
we don't.
So that doesn't matter?
We don't go by construction class, we go by comparable incomes.
Incomes, okay. So the fact that it's included is sort of irrelevant to your analysis, basically?
It's good for us to look at,
Okay.
but it's not what we base our income on.
Okay. And the mix of properties or units, 1 bedroom versus 2, I see that they all have 1 or 2,
Yes.
but there's a different proportion. Does that make a difference?
We use an average rent, so it would probably influence depending on.
Mhm.
So it could make a difference.
Mhm. How could it?
If they are charging significantly more for 2 bedrooms, but
You don't see that in this instance, or you?
I haven't done a in-depth evaluation of all of the comparables, so I'm not sure what they are charging for what types of rents. We're going on just their average incomes. Yes.
Okay. Your cap rate is 5.
Yes.
I see in the multifamily, I'm assuming that's where I'm looking, that's on the low end.
Yes.
Is that reflective of a newer building?
Yes, this one was built in 2016, so that would influence it.
Okay. Okay. How old are these other buildings? Oh, I see, sorry. 2013, 2015, 2013, so they're also
Similar.
relatively. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Mr. Buss, any questions of the assessor?
Yes. Would this, under the cap rates, multifamily, would this be high-rise, low-rise? Low-rise A, low-rise B?
For our valuation, we don't differentiate. So if you notice that our cap rates, it's the same for all of those. We keep them in there so that it is easier to compare with the Colliers and the Cushman Wakefield, because they differentiate between them. For ourselves, we do not. So that's so that it's more descriptive of how we use to look at how the market, how the other market people who do these evaluations on cap rate, to see how we compare with theirs, to see that we fall within the ranges that they also have.
Okay. Would you consider this, is this in the high-rise range yet at 7 stories, or the high-rise?
I don't look at that, sorry.
Okay. What Mr. Smith had pointed out before about the vacancy loss,
Mhm.
what percentage does that work out to, do you know?
No, I didn't calculate that.
Okay.
I wasn't looking at their vacancy loss.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buss. Ms. Martin's location of the subject property, is it on Bison Drive, just west of Pembina, by the tracks there, kind of superstore?
I believe it's in close to the superstore.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay, just west of Pembina, okay. And that income and expense statement on page, let's see what we got here. Page 8 through 13. This covers the 12 months ending December 31st, 2017. And to follow up on Mr. Buss's question and Mr. Smith's about the vacancy loss, was this a rent, kind of a rent-out period from the building being new, or in your opinion?
In my opinion, I would say that yes, because it was built in 2016, so it takes a while to fully rent.
Do you know when it was completed in 2016?
No, I do not. I don't have that.
Okay, that's all my questions. Mr. Smith, when you're ready, please.
Okay, thank you. So 50, pardon me, 50 Bison Drive. We have property that was built in, completed rather in 2016. Total of 166 units. You can see on my page number 1 inside the breakdown of those units, being between one bedrooms with den, and various types of 2-bedroom units. So 166 units in total. The property has been appealed at the Board of Revision in 2018 and 16, and both of those decisions are before the municipal board at this point, with the results shown on page number 1 there. The property is new as shown, built in 2016, pretty standard build out for a new build. Certainly nice furnishings. It's not you know, the top end luxury that you might see in some of the newer ones on Assiniboine, etc. But it is certainly good quality construction and finishings. The location is immediately west of Pembina Highway, just off of Bison Drive. as shown on my page number 10. You can see the location there. It's close to the university. And that is shown on page 10 in the aerial. Moving on to the valuation for the property, we have examined and tested the income and expense for the property to determine whether it's reflective of true market rental rates and expenses. The rents are shown at the bottom of my page number 12 for each of the unit types, with the resultant gross rent potential at the bottom there being shown as $2,958,870. That's 100% occupied all of the time. The rental rate comparables that we've provided on page number 13 are recent construction buildings, so very comparable in terms of location and amenities, size of the units, build out, etc. You can see the description for each of those on page number 13 and 14 with the minimum, maximum, and averages shown for each of the unit types at the bottom of the chart. And if you examine those ranges as well as the averages, it does show that the rents being charged for the building are reflective of market. So we've utilized the in-place rental rates for the subject. So the gross rent potential at full occupancy is $2,958,870. That's representing full lease up. Now, at this point, I will point out, yes, it was built in 2016, so the 2017 period was also a period of lease up, so we had just under 5% vacancy being shown for year end 2017, which is obviously higher than the city's 2.4% that is reflected. Now, we recognize that that's the period of lease up, so I have not asked for any additional vacancy for that particular purpose, as it did come into line with market as of the valuation date. The one additional point to consider with that property, though, given its location by the university, is that it does draw a lot of university students, and they do tend to run into issues where terms end at school and people leave early, so they do run into issues where you have additional vacancy beyond the norm. That being said, we've deferred to the 2.4% vacancy allowance as used by the city. The expense allowance for the property, the 2016 expenses are shown on page number 15. That represents only a partial year. I just provided those for background. The 2017 expenses are shown on page number 17 at the top in a chart, and you can see that they come down to the value of $1,068,850. I will point out that the maintenance is broken into a number of parts, but it is relatively low for a building of this size. So using the in-place income and expense, including, we've also included any additional income that the property generates, that being parking and storage, we come down to an NOI of $1,828,816. Now, moving on from there to capitalization rate. The subject property is relatively new, so it doesn't have a lot of deferred maintenance at this point in time. There are a number of other points to consider with regard to that, though. The main one being that investors in the multifamily market in Winnipeg and in other markets indeed are typically looking for acquisitions where they can increase the return on their investment through renovations of the rental units, where they can then increase the rental rates, drive more net income to the property, and therefore increase their return on investment for the property. So they tend to buy properties such as that at lower capitalization rates towards the bottom of the range of 5%. Now, the subject property is brand new, and it really has no opportunity of augmenting the income. It's at the top of the range for what it provides in the marketplace. So there is no opportunity to go in, buy this, and increase your return on investment. The cap rates in the market have remained very stable over the last number of years. We've provided data from both Colliers International as well as C.B. Richard Ellis. The cap rates that Colliers quotes for low-rise apartments were at 5.25% to 6% in 2016, and 5 to 6% in 2018. So essentially the same values there, with high rises ranging 5 to 5.75 and 5 to 6% in 2018. Now, the subject property isn't truly a high rise. It's not a 3-story walk-up either. It's more of a mid-rise building. There is no true breakout of properties such as that in the information provided in these market studies by Colliers or C.B. Richard Ellis. So there's nothing directly pointing to those, but it's safe to say that it would follow the same pattern. C.B. Richard Ellis's information points to cap rates in 2016 for low rises at 5.5% to 6%, and in 2018 between 5.75% and 6%. Now that's reflective of educated investors buying institutional grade properties on the market in Winnipeg. So this would represent knowledgeable consumers making wise investment choices. So we're looking again in that 5 to 6% range. The subject property does not show any potential for further rental income boosts, so what you're buying is what you get. Our own study of market capitalization rates shows a broad range between 5 and a little over 6% for capitalization rates, and that is internal to Stevenson Advisors. So we believe that the subject property, being a good quality recent development at essentially generating the maximum return that it's going to produce, you would achieve a capitalization rate for a property such as this at 5.5%. And utilizing this cap rate, if you look at my page number 20, capitalizing the net income, this gives us a final market value of $33,251,000. And Our addenda materials simply include the rent roll, income and expense, and then the market studies that were referred to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
On your page 1, it mentions that there's the 4 guest suites. How are those guest suites calculated in regards to vacancy percentage?
How are they calculated in regards to, we
How-
apply the.
How is it
two-
treated?
The 2.4% is applied to the overall income as a whole. So that would be inclusive of the guest suites. Now, I'm just flipping back here. If you look at my page number 12,
Mhm.
the guest suites, we've assigned a monthly rental rate of $915 per month for those 4 guest suites. So they're included in the 100%
Okay.
occupancy. Now, that is a good point. They aren't typically fully occupied all of the time, but we have accounted for revenue for those units as they do rent out. The reason for the 915 discrepancy between that, say, and the 1-bedrooms is that they're very small. It's a bathroom and a smaller bedroom. They're not the size of a normal rental unit.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, any questions of the appellant?
I don't know.
Thank you. Rob, any questions of the appellant?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Oh, I do have one question I'd like to ask.
Sure, go ahead.
Would you consider this a good location?
It is a good location, yes.
You were saying about the university students all wanting to leave in the end of the term, but they would be signing year-long leases when they, is that correct?
They do, yes. They would be signed up for a year. What they experience there is that, yes, they sign up for the year, but they do tend to skip out on occasion, so it leads to a slight increase in vacancy over what the standard market would be in terms of bad debt.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
Anything else, Rob?
No.
You're good? Okay. And I have no questions, Mr. Smith. I think it's clear where you're coming from here. Any requirements for summary at all, Ms. Martins?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes 50 Bison Drive. Okay, next property on the docket is 70 Bison Drive. Ms. Martins, when you're ready, please.
Thank you. This is roll number 03091611500, 70 Bison Drive. This is classification residential 2. Liability is taxable. The assessed value is $23,658,000. We have a land area of 113,319 square feet and a plan area of 30,852 square feet. This building was built in 2013. It has 96 suites. If you look on page 3, we have rental comparables. And then on page 4, we have the income workup. On this property, we have a monthly rent per suite of $1,610.39, which gives us a potential gross income of $1,855,169. We have a vacancy loss of 2.4% and expenses at 34.67%. We have a cap at 5%, which gives us our $23,658,000. After that, we've got our cap rate page, and I've attached the mailer as it was submitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor evidence?
Just very quickly, on your page number 3, the rental comparables, just to, I guess, clarify what they are. The 800 Dover Court, that's in very, very close proximity to the subject, right? Just kind of around the corner, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yeah.
And that, I believe they have ensuite laundry there as well, 2-bed, 2-bath, stainless steel appliances, very similar from what I understand in terms of the build-out. Is that fair to say?
I'm sorry, I did not have an
Okay.
opportunity to
I
in
shouldn't
depth
grill you
at
on the,
the comps.
that's fine. Number 2, that's Conrad House, is that correct? Across from Safeway in Osborne Village?
I
Okay.
didn't have an opportunity.
I apologize. It's difficult to phrase these as questions, and I don't mean to put you on the spot by any means. And then 50 Bison Drive obviously is the partner building that we just discussed. Those are all of my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Buss, any questions of the assessor?
Be fair to say that comparables 1 and 3 are the best comparables for rent. Would you agree with that?
I haven't been in any of the comparables, and I haven't had an opportunity to look at them, so I'm not sure how the suites compare. I'm not sure the size of them. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the comparables.
By location alone,
They're
one would.
the closer location-wise.
Okay.
Anything else, Rob?
Yes, just one more.
Yeah, of course, take your time.
You might have said this, but the vacancy loss, 2.4%, that's the same as the previous one, so
Yes.
that's the standard, nothing special here for that. Okay, that's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buss. Lynn, any questions of the assessor?
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Martins, the rent you're using for the income approach is $16.10. Would you mind kind of giving us a quick overview on the income and expense statement, how that compares to their actual?
If you look on page 8,
Okay.
their gross rent potential is $1,780,683.75.
Okay.
And our potential gross income is $1,855,169.
And we've got a ratio about, I guess 60 to 2/3 is two-bedroom suites, 1/3 is one-bedroom suites, okay. Okay, that's all my questions, thank you. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Absolutely. So, we're looking at 70 Bison Drive. This is the same developer and ownership as the prior property at 50. This one was developed again in 2013, or completed in 2013, so a little bit more history on this property. If you look at my page number 1, you can see the breakdown of units, and indeed they have 1/3 one-bedroom units and 2/3 two-bedroom units for the subject property. You can also see the history of the assessment appeals from the last 2 cycles as shown on page number 1, with both of those at the municipal board. There's a few photos of the property. It's very similar to the other property, slightly older. And you can see the finishes, etc. It is in the same location on the other side of the parking lot and is located at that Bison Drive, Pembina Highway intersection, essentially, as shown on the aerial on page number 9. And again, moving on to our income valuation for the subject property. We have looked at the in-place income and expenses in comparison to the market. And if you look on page 11, you can see the rental rates being charged for the 1 and the 2 beds, and the resultant gross rent potential at $1,790,484. That's 100% occupied, based on the rents that are being charged for the building. We've provided comparables on page number 12 and 13 that are also recently built and prove this out. You can see the ranges of the rental rates for those. So essentially the rent that is being charged there is fair market rent for that property at that location. We've also included the additional income of parking revenue as well as storage income that they generated on site for that property as well. And included the guest suite revenue that they had generated as well, which was $1,843. So it's, I believe they just have 1 guest suite here, and it's not a situation where it's rented all the time. Moving on from the income side, our expenses, estimated expenses, the vacancy for the subject property, again, we've deferred to the normalized vacancy of 2.4% as used by the city. The stats are shown on page 14. We do have a 3-year history in this case of expenses for the property, and you can see how we've stabilized those to arrive at our expense allowance of $724,826. We've used, in many cases or most cases, 3-year averages where it's appropriate. If there was an anomaly, we may have used 2 years in order to better reflect what would be appropriate for the property. And we've used the actual taxes for the property, of course. And moving on, this is reflected on my page number 15, is summarized in the chart, bringing you down to a net operating income of $1,037,918. Our cap rate commentary is identical for this property as it was for the last property, and our summary of the valuation is shown on page number 18. So as you can see, the rent generated by the property is lower than what's estimated by the city. And the actual expenses for the property are somewhat higher than allowed by the city as well, at $724,826. Now, this is professionally managed, and they're charged an appropriate fee. The owner is actually a very hands-on owner, so there's no, he keeps a tight rein on expenses, so the expenses that are shown there are very appropriate for the subject. So utilizing our cap rate of 5.5% generates a market value of $18,870,000, which let's see. Just want to make sure that that was correctly transcribed here. We have 18,871,000. That's fine. $1,000 difference in rounding. The addendum materials are the same as for the last property, including the rent roll as well as income and expense for the years shown. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
What was the actual vacancy, the vacancy loss? Do you know?
I believe it was a little under 2%. Let me just find the appropriate income and expense page here. Just give me a moment, I'll work that out. It was 1.5% for the 2017 year.
Okay.
Of course, that varies over time. As with the last one, we didn't ask for more or less vacancy. That we feel the 2.4% over time would be reflective of vacancy in the market.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Buss, any questions of Mr. Smith?
So would the main difference in the value come from the cap rate and expenses?
Well, there's a number of differences. If you can flip to my page number 18,
Yes.
you can see that the gross potential rent is significantly under what's projected by the city. We, of course, add in the additional income, which brings it up, but you're still looking at $50,000+ under. And then the expenses stabilized over 3 years are somewhat higher than allowed for by the city, as well as what we feel is an appropriate cap rate at 5.5%. So really it's income, expense, and cap rate.
Okay. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Thank you. Glenn, any questions?
No, I have no questions.
Okay. I'm just looking at the difference in the expenses. Mr. Smith, you used actuals or kind of on page 14, you've stabilized over 3 years.
That's right.
The expenses, but we come in at about 7% more than the 6.5% more than the assessor.
Yes, now then you're looking at percentages and not what the actual
Yeah.
expenses are, right? So
Right.
that depends on the gross.
So, Ms.
potential.
Martin, your expense allowance is model driven, is
Yes,
that
it
right?
is.
Okay, whereas Mr. Smith, yours is the actual stabilized over the 3 years.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, and this is located, I guess, Bison Drive, again, right next door to the other property.
That's correct.
Just west of Pembina, yeah, okay. So we've got the same, probably student population renting this, these units too?
There's a high degree of students there, yes. It's not entirely, obviously, but does draw that
Yeah.
cohort.
Okay, all right. That's all my questions for you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any requirement for a summary?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
No,
You're
thank you.
good? Okay, that concludes 70 Bison Drive. I think we're gonna take a 10-minute recess here. Please, Kelsey. Okay, thanks, Kelsey. I'll call the hearing back to order. Next property on the docket is 495 Lindenwood Drive East. And we're dealing with a 2020 realty appeal. Okay, Ms. Martins, when you are ready, please.
Okay. This is roll number 10006359800, 495 Lindenwood Drive East. The assessed value is $11,677,000. This is classified as residential 2, and the liability status is taxable. This is a 3-story apartment building. It was built in 2003. The land area is 119,691 square feet with a plan area of 23,750 square feet. This property has 52 suites. And if you look on page 3, we have some rental comparables. And on page 4, we have the income workup. We have the monthly rent per suite at $1,467.36, giving us a potential gross income of $915,633. We have a vacancy loss of 2.4%, expenses at 34.67%, with a cap rate of 5%, which gives us a value of $11,677,000. The income and expense is included on the back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
Again, just very briefly, and I recognize that you don't know the comparables in detail, of course. These are all normal market rental apartments, I believe.
I believe so, yes.
Just looking at the first column is just showing 475, and I'm assuming is that a typo or?
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
That's from the other property.
Okay. So again, this is market driven based on standard market rental apartment properties, correct?
Yes, yes.
In all respects.
Mhm.
Those are all of my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Lady, any questions of the assessor?
Okay, so just to confirm, the information on your page 3 is from 475.
Yes, the comparables are to apply to
They're still the same comparables?
the same comparables, but just the subject property was 475 and not 495.
Okay, so the average monthly rent per unit is not 1,034. We should be looking at your page 4.
Yes, the 1,046.
Also for the breakdown of suites.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just needed to clarify that. I'm trying to follow along and I can't. Okay, I have no questions then.
Thanks, Lynn.
Oh, I do, I guess. These comparables are sort of all over the city. You picked these comparables from all over the city, why?
Based on the other features of the apartment that would be comparable.
Which features are those?
The more along the lines of the age of construction, and I wanted to go more towards properties that had a similar mix of units.
Okay.
Similar numbers, nearing similar gross floor area, so they were similar in their other features.
Age, mix, size, those sorts of things, okay. So you have one of these comparables that's closest? I mean, it's not location, obviously.
You know what, I haven't actually been to any of the comparables, so it's hard for me to say that, oh yes, the finish on this one and the other features of the other ones are the most comparable, because I haven't been to any of them.
Okay.
And if you're looking at this area, it's, when I was looking at this property, there aren't a lot of apartment buildings that are right in there.
Okay.
So it was tougher to find ones that were comparable close by, and that's why instead of just trying to find the best ones that might be the closest, I went more citywide.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Mr. Buss, any questions?
Yes. So this property has 52 suites. Eight one
Yes.
bedroom. So the average monthly rent at $14.67 is higher than any of the comparables.
Yes.
Is that maybe because of location? Is Lindenwood better location than the other areas, Leela, Paget? Or any particular reason?
It could be because the location, because the neighborhood, I'm not sure. It was model driven. The other locations, I looked at ones that were also close to shopping centers, because this one is influenced by the shopping center being close by.
Okay. And on page 4, the expenses at 34.67%. Is that the standard that we've seen in the other ones that we looked at this morning?
It's model.
Oh, so it varies, does it vary a bit from year to year, like this one is?
This is my first year doing apartment buildings, so I'm not sure if it varies year to year, but I know that it does vary based on the quality of the building.
Okay.
The income quality will influence the expenses.
And the age of the buildings?
I'm not sure if that influences the expenses.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Martins, you're showing 52 suites, the income and expense statement is showing 51. Would that be because there's a caretaker suite they're not including possibly? We're showing a difference of 1 suite.
I'm not sure. Oh, it says, oh, no, sorry. I was going to say that the parking, it says that there's 52
Yeah, it does.
indoor parking spots.
Yeah. First, on their income and expense, they're,
It says that there's one less 2-bedroom.
yeah.
I'm not sure why there is a difference between what we have and what is in there.
Yeah, okay, so it might be a caretaker, suite, maybe Mr. Smith will know. And is this it's a life lease?
This is a life lease.
Okay,
Mhm. Maybe this is it.
so we've got an entrance, let's call it an entrance, a share fee that they pay, and then there's rent. I guess it would be reduced rent to reflect that investment they made into the complex. Okay. And location, are we kind of Waverly Wilkes, or are we Waverly McGilvery?
It's behind over by Kenniston.
Oh, okay, it's on the west side of Linden
It's-
Woods, okay.
Yes, it's behind the Safeway, Home Depot routes, that big,
Okay, so the east side of Kenniston, it's further east, behind that commercial off Kenniston. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. Canadian Tire,
yeah.
I guess, tucked in there, yeah. And it's just on the other side, on the east side of that commercial there, a block away or whatever. Okay, I've got it now. And I guess we've got 3 coming up that would be in a similar
Yes, they're all.
neighborhood right there. Okay,
They're between, at the corner of Lindenwood Drive East and Lindenwood Drive West.
yeah, it's a bit confusing because Lindenwood Drive East, I guess, goes all the way to Lindenwood West, huh? Loops through there, okay. Okay, I've got it, okay. So your methodology of assessing a life lease would be treated as an apartment, an income-producing apartment?
I think it's very hard to factor in the various levels of entrance fee.
Yeah.
And with dealing with all of that, and to make it equitable, it's treated as how we would, the potential rent as it stands.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And last question, what is the actual rent they're getting? Oh, I guess maybe it's, in some ways, it's reduced because of the life lease.
Yes, so the
entry.
actual annual income is stated on page 7 as $507,079.
Page 7. Okay.
Oh, sorry, but on page 10,
Yeah,
it's
527.
489, well, and then I guess with the other
Mhm. Other than-
529.
So they're including interest and parking, okay.
Mhm.
I'm looking at page 10.
Yeah,
So it totally ignores the life lease entrance fee.
yes,
Yeah. Would it be fair to say it's kind of a sort of a
Subsidy,
subsidized
yeah.
rent in a way, because they put money towards the rent
Mhm.
by getting into that building?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Why wouldn't they do them as condominiums? Those people, you sort of own the place, don't you, when you buy that life lease?
I haven't done a lot of looking into, but it is significantly different.
It's owned by the
more-
corporation, or
Yeah,
the life lease itself.
You don't get the ownership of your unit. It's, you have an investment in order to get a reduced rent, which I guess is similar to condo fees, but
Yeah. But when you
You
go
don't
to
have
sell
a
it, you
title.
don't have to sell it, you just
You don't
get your
have to
money
sell
out.
yeah.
Correct.
And they put it up for sale, is that correct? Yeah, the corporation, do we call
They
it a
release it.
corporation?
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
And for somebody to move in there has to replace that entry fee that was in place plus a percentage of improvements or something like that.
Well, I guess they, like each property that has it has a different way of figuring out
Okay.
what new amount they would put in. And it's my understanding that there's different levels of entry fee which will influence the amount of rent paid on a monthly basis.
Yeah, depending on the size of the unit, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, and the size of the investment,
Yeah,
The more you put in, the less you pay, so, yeah.
yeah.
yeah. But there's a standard, there is a rate set on each unit when it comes up for sale.
Did you want me?
Yeah,
I
just,
can chime in if you
Yeah.
want.
yeah.
Yeah, so it is a life lease, and yes, the amount that they pay is based on what their deposit essentially is at the beginning of their life lease when they go in, and that's reflected in what they pay on a monthly basis. So the income they generate is not reflective of market, and neither one of us has treated it as in that manner.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Smith, I have no other questions, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Okay, so as stated, 495 Lindenwood Drive East, it is a life lease property. So as mentioned, the tenants do not own the unit that they occupy. They're not condominiums. The corporation owns them. The occupants lease the units from the corporation for the term of their life, or when they decide to exit to go to greater levels of care, etc. So there's no element of it being a condo in that manner. So in terms of the subject property, I'll just kind of point out three things in the beginning, maybe four things. We do treat it for valuation purposes as a standard market apartment in order to determine market value. That being said, it is a life lease facility, so if one were to purchase this property, there are legal ramifications regarding the legal ownership of the property and the occupants of those units having the right to occupy that unit going forward until the end of the term of their life, or until they leave. So there are complications, we'll say, but we treat the valuation of it up until capitalization rate in the same manner. So the quick points for the subject property: their property is very well managed, professionally managed. They do have higher expenses than higher expenses than what the city has projected for the subject property, but they are the actual expenses. We've made adjustments where appropriate to remove any expenses that would not be encountered in a normal standard market apartment. So there is no element of there being additional expenses incurred here because of it being a life lease facility. One point in that regard is there is more common area than what one would typically find in a normal market apartment. And second point is there can be a limited higher end seniors rental market. So we're looking at, if this was a normal market apartment, you have units that are going for up to, I can't remember what our top end here is, $1469 is what I arrived at. There's a lot of product on the market, so would they achieve these rental rates? Would the vacancy be a standard market vacancy? Are the questions surrounding that. And then, as mentioned, on disposition, you have occupants in each of these units that has a lease and the right to occupy that unit for the term of their life, and based on the lease that they signed. So if you were a investor and you came along to purchase this property, it's not a standard market apartment in that way. So you're looking at having to essentially hold this until each of the units becomes vacant in order to convert it to normalized market operation where you could charge what the market would bear essentially. So the rates that the rates that the occupants would be paying would continue based on the lease that they had signed if one were to purchase this. So I'll quickly run through this one. So it was built in 2003. We have a total of 52 units, 8 one-beds and 44 two-bedrooms. It is located on Lindenwood Drive East. If you look at the aerial on page number 5, it'll give you the exact location of it there. So it's in behind the Smart Center where Safeway or Canadian Tire, I think it might be Canadian Tire that's right on that particular corner. So just in behind there is where 495 is located. Our other 2 properties, 475 and 490, are also part of this complex. There's 4 of them in total, 2 on each side of the road. They are developed by the same nonprofit organization, and which is Winnipeg Mennonite Seniors Care, Inc. They're a nonprofit entity. They developed 2 assisted living facilities and 2 life lease facilities. So essentially, if you were to be in the life lease facility and come to the point in time where you needed more care, you can get preferential treatment and moving next door into the assisted living. So there's, as mentioned, 4 of them in close proximity there. Let's move on to the valuation itself. So yes, the rental charge is $489,000. That's somewhat irrelevant. We need to treat it as what would they achieve on the open market itself. So we look at my page number 4. These are newer market apartments that are very comparable to the subject. You can see the locations of them. We have the spot at Tuxedo Point, which is Sterling Lion Parkway. We have the rents shown there, newly constructed, higher end furnishings than the subject property, so you can see the rents are somewhat higher than what we feel we would achieve at the subject. We have Lumen Tower, which is also near the university on Barn Street, and the rents applicable there. Also a newer product. And we have 225 Northtown Road, Bridgewater Heights. You can see the rents achieved there. Obviously new product in Bridgewater. And then a little further south on Pembina Highway, there's the spot at 2815. And you can see the 1 and 2 bedroom rents there. Also a very nice product. So the ranges for 1 bedroom units ranged between $1,048 and $1,245, with an average of $1,138. 2 bedrooms ranging between $1,368 and $1,645, with an average of $1,469. So we feel that these are very applicable to the subject, so we used the average rent from these properties and applied it to the units, giving us a gross rent of $884, $880 for the subject property. We've applied the standard vacancy of 2.4%. CMHC is showing 2.9%. We're deferring to the 2.4%. And our expenses, as shown on page number 9, you can see the 3-year history and how we've stabilized those for the valuation date. Our stabilized expenses come to $397,332. Our R&M for that property stabilized comes to $935 a suite. So total expenses come to $397,332. This is higher than what the city has allowed for in their estimate of 34.67%. Now again, that's model driven and based on the whole range of apartments, probably narrowed down to more more recently built ones, but again, we're not looking at, probably not looking at a lot of newer built apartments with a fair degree of common area, et cetera. So the actual expenses would drive a stabilized expense ratio, or expense amount rather, of $397,332. Moving on from there to cap rate, and this will hold true for all three properties that we're looking at. Linden Woods here, we have a seniors multifamily project, this particular one being a life lease facility. The bottom of page number 10, you can see we have a graph which is from C.B. Richard Ellis study. It's a little dated now, but you can see the trend with regard to the delta between what a market apartment trades for versus various levels of seniors multifamily properties. So looking at that, you can see that there is a premium that is applied to these properties above what a normal market average cap rate would be. That's shown at the bottom of page 10 on the graph as indicated. The CBRE also issued a seniors housing and healthcare Canadian cap rate survey. Again, we're going back to 2015 in this case. They did not have an updated version, or I would have supplied it. So unfortunately, we're looking at a slightly historical document, but the point is they posed the question to the most active seniors housing market participants in Canada, saying, what cap rate would you value a Class A independent and assisted living facility in the following markets: Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, assuming that the property was stabilized and it was a clean deal, meaning there was no complications, etc., with regard to anything out of the norm as far as purchasing a property such as that. So the point being here, we're looking at Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, and we have cap rates ranging between 6.5% up to 7.13% in Montreal. Now, that is 2015, but the point being those are significantly above what market cap rates would be in those respective markets if you were to have the same chart from C.B. Richard Ellis and or Colliers at that time frame. So,
Good morning.
good morning. So, with respect to that, at the bottom of page number 11, we again present the multifamily stats from Colliers International, and you can see that cap rates remain very stable between 5.25% and 6%, 5 to 6% in 2018. High rises being 5 to 5.75, 5 to 6%. So the point of all of this is we're looking at a stable market as far as capitalization rates in that time frame. C.B. Richard Ellis shows roughly the same thing, with their cap rates for high rises being 5 to 5.75 and low rises being 5.5 to 6%, 5.75 to 6%. Again, a little bit higher from CBRE, and we have the 2018 stats for the same organization showing 5 to 5.75% for high rises, 5.5 to 6% for low rises. Now, we're not dealing with a standard market apartment, so that's simply for reflective purposes. The subject is a life lease facility. It's not a standard market apartment. The units are well furnished, they're somewhat roomy, it is well located. So in looking at these factors, and again, very much keeping in mind that if you were to buy this as an investor, you're acquiring the leases that are in place on the property, and those occupants have the right to remain there in that, in those units, under those conditions in the lease. So your rent that you're achieving there is the rent that you would be earning. We feel that there would be a premium placed on this. We have assigned a capitalization rate of 5.75% to the subject property. All of this is summarized on my page number 14. So you can see that the gross potential rent comes in at $905,000. Our expense allowance, based on stabilized history, is $397,000. And using a cap rate of 5.75% for the subject, we get a final market value of $8,458,000. And the addendum materials are the income and expense for the property, as well as the materials referred to in the brief itself, including the valuation of seniors housing and long-term care facilities. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
Yes, please. Looking on page 8, on the comparables, are any of those seniors or leaning towards having seniors in them?
They're not specifically designed for seniors. I do know that the Sterling Lion property does draw a high degree of seniors renters in that because of the location.
Are any of those properties working in cooperation with assisted living facilities?
No, these are straight market apartments.
Okay, so did you do any type of factoring into your rent analysis, how the rent might be influenced by the potential of having preferential treatment of a senior shifting into assisted living at such a time as they might need to?
No, in that we're looking at the revenue and expense for the property and the market value based on it as a standalone property. So it's what would they pardon me, be able to generate on the market. So we haven't applied a premium for that reason.
Okay, but it is one of the, I heard you mention that they do get preferential treatment moving into assisted living. So that might be something that would be on their pamphlets as an influencer to encourage more of a premium in rent?
I don't know that it would drive a greater rent for the property, but it is part of the overall nonprofit complex that they have there.
Thank you. Now, one other thing with the cap rate study, for the trends and how they differ for the seniors housing as opposed to the apartment buildings. Now, for these cap rates, how did adjusted rents or life lease rents or any of that type of situation factor in for the cap rate? Did they switch over to market? Did they use the actuals that are getting, and how did they determine the market rents if they were using market rents in order to determine the cap rate, and how the cap rate, the trends?
So these are not reflective. If we're looking at my chart on page number 11, which is the CBRE cap rate survey of investors, they're not representative of individual transactions. They're the most active seniors housing market participants, so national level investors in this type of product. What cap rates would they assign to 2 stabilized assisted living facilities in these 4 markets. And then those responses are taken and shown. So it's not an adjustment based on changing any rents or expenses. Is what would you buy that product for?
Okay, so they didn't use the current incomes on any of the properties?
No, again, this is the informed opinion of the most active market participants in that market segment. This is what they would apply as far as a cap rate in those individual markets. So it's not reflective of any particular individual deal. It's what they have observed and paid for in these markets and what they would attribute a cap rate to be in those markets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Buss, any questions of the appellant?
Yes. On page 1 of your brief, at the bottom of the chart, it says concrete and steel frame construction. So on the chart that you're showing on page 11 with the blue on it, is that CBRE as well? Or is
No,
that-
page number 11 is Collier's. The description just above it refers to the Collier stats. So
Okay.
it's 2016 as the top chart, and then 2018 is the bottom chart.
Okay, so it's showing low-rise multifamily in Winnipeg from 5.25 to 6. When they say low-rise, would it be fair to assume that they're talking, they could be including wood frame buildings?
Absolutely, yes.
Whereas our subject property here is low-rise but steel and concrete construction?
Yes, this particular property is steel and concrete. Now, that's not to say that they would exclusively have wood frame construction in there, because there are other similar product that's out there that built around the same time that would be steel and concrete as well. So it's the whole market.
Okay. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buss. Lynn, any questions?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on one thing. The life lease property, is it considered a senior's property, or did you say that it's not necessarily marketed to seniors, it's for all?
Oh, no, it is definitely
It
a
is
senior's
definitely a
apartment.
senior's
Yeah,
property.
you have to be a senior in order to get occupancy there.
Like even,
Yes.
like going in, yeah,
That's,
okay.
it's run by the nonprofit entity that owns and manages all 4 properties, and the sole intent of them is for seniors.
Okay, sorry, I just hadn't heard that,
Yeah.
and I thought,
No problem.
yeah.
Would it be fair to say it's 55 plus?
It would
Life lease?
be 55 plus, I believe, is their cutoff, but typically there's very few 55-year-olds that are in there. It tends to skew higher than that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Any appeal history on this property?
There is, but it goes back a little ways, so I didn't present it. I think our last one, which we just resolved at the municipal board, was 2014.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Was it 2014 or 2012?
It may have been 2012. I didn't bring it with, you know what, it was 2012.
It's 2012.
Yeah, mine was.
So there's nothing from 2016 or 2018 pending
Oh, yes.
at the municipal board?
Which one, I
It
had a
was
list of which ones, because out of the 4 of them, some of them have 16 and 18, and some of them just have one or the other, right?
495 does not have 18.
Okay.
Okay. But possibly 2016?
20, possible, I do not have that information, I'm
Okay.
afraid.
I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that this one has a 2016 on it.
Okay. Okay. My next question, Mr. Smith, on page 8, when you're doing the analysis of comparable rents,
Mhm.
I think you make a comment here that you're gonna use 1,469 per unit, average.
For the 2 bedrooms. If you look at the bottom of page 8, we have
Okay.
the average of 1138 for the 1 beds and 1469 for the 2 beds,
Okay.
based on our study above.
And if we go to page 14, you're using market rent of 1,418, but then you add in parking income and cable income, and I think 905,381 equals about 1,451, as opposed to the assessor at 1,467. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I'm sure it is,
Okay.
I didn't break it down.
Okay, so you're close there, yeah.
We are, yes.
Expenses. These are privately held by each unit owner.
The units are, yes.
Yeah, so they're responsible for upgrading the carpets, painting.
They would be responsible for the inside of their unit over the term that they're in there, yes. Which
Yeah.
is probably reflected in the repair and maintenance at $935
Yeah.
per suite.
Okay, that's an average, probably taking care of the common area and the hallways, I suppose.
Correct, and
Yeah.
the structure,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so if they, let's say somebody wants to put in new kitchen cabinets, they would be responsible for that cost. If they want to renew the flooring, they'd be responsible for that cost. The appliances?
I do not have that information for you, unfortunately. I'm not
Okay.
positive about the appliances.
And I suppose they would be required to submit any improvements to the board to have approval, I think?
Absolutely,
That'd be fair, yeah.
they do have to get approval in order to do any changes to their
Yeah.
unit, because it is a lease, not an ownership situation. Again, their average repair and maintenance for the building is $935 a suite, which is on the low end
Yeah.
and would be reflective of that.
Now, let's say somebody invests $20,000 in kitchen cabinets and flooring and painting the interior. When they go to move out, let's say they moved in and they invested $75,000, do they recoup any of that?
No, they don't. They recoup what they paid for their down payment, not what they would have changed to
Okay.
the unit if they did change it. I've been in the property, and I don't recall seeing a lot of changes, frankly.
Yeah.
They're fairly similar.
Could it be the circumstance that let's say they invested 75,000, they put 20 into it, is it possible, and this is just from experience from hearing other properties,
Mhm.
that the owner would be paid, or would get 85,000 out, and the new owner would have to split that, like add another 10,000? In other words, they divide the improvement by 50% and add it to the entrance fee for the next owner?
That was not conveyed to me, and as a nonprofit, I believe that any amount that you had spent on improving the unit,
It's a
it would
loss.
simply be a lost cost. You're not,
Yeah,
it's not a for-profit entity.
yeah, okay. Yeah, because it's a different circumstance, isn't it? You know?
There's a lot of different variations on life leases. and,
Yeah, okay.
a lot of
So in
wrinkles.
this one, if you wanted new flooring, would you go to the board and request that yours is 15 years old, original from 2003? Would they replace it for you, or would you be responsible for it?
My understanding is that you're responsible for the interior of your unit over that time, and that the only thing I'm not positive about would be appliances.
Yeah, okay, fair enough, yeah. Okay. And you're requesting the capitalization rate be 5.75, basically because it's a complicated situation with basically life leases in place that you'd have to wait for people to move out.
Well,
to free
and,
them up.
yeah, so there's a number of things that come into play there. The ranges that are shown by CBRE and Colliers, and we ourselves, of course, do keep track of cap rates, and our broad range is 5 to a little over 6%, which I believe I've stated in there as well. So that's the range that we're seeing. The bottom end of that is essentially paid out where you can improve the return on property you're purchasing by increasing the income on it through renovations, et cetera. So we see properties such as this where we're essentially assigning a top-end market rate to it based on new product. We're saying that there is no upside here as far as if you were to treat it as a market apartment in the way that we have, you wouldn't be able to change that revenue stream upwards beyond what we're assigning to it. So there would be, you would not be paying the most aggressive cap rate if it were a straight market apartment. Add on to that fact, the fact that it is a life lease. So I'm investor A, I know the market, I'm looking at buying this, and I have 52 not owner occupants, but life lease occupants who have the right to remain in place in their units according to all the terms of their lease, paying what they're paying over that time span. So would I pay a premium for that, or would I pay in paying a lower cap rate, or would I pay less and a higher cap rate because of that issue? And it's clear to me that you would assign a higher cap rate to it in what you would pay. So we're at 5.75% for this, and slightly higher on the following properties, as we'll get into.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Martins, any requirement for summary?
No, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
No, thank you.
Okay. I think you just did it? Thank you. Okay, that concludes 495. 495 Lindenwood Drive East. Next property on the docket is 475 Lindenwood Drive East. We're dealing with a 2020 realty assessment appeal. Ms. Martins, when you are ready, please.
This is roll number 10006359700. That's 475 Lindenwood Drive East. This assessed value is $18,605,000. This is classified as an institutional property with a liability status of S, which is taxable school tax exempt. This property is the land is 185,232 square feet with a plan area of 45,934 square feet. We have the year built between 2002 to 2005, and the number of stories is 2 to 4. On page 4 is the income workup. We have the suite count at 135, with the monthly rent per suite at $1,034.94, which gives us our potential gross income of $1,676,603, 2.4% vacancy loss, 43.15% expenses, and 5% cap rate. That gives us our $18,605,000. We have the cap rate information, and we have the mailer on the back. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, any questions?
Just broadly with regard to the comparables, the subject property has 65%, or 2/3, I guess you could say, one-bedroom units, in comparison to the comps, which are 0%, 14, 30, and 15. That would tend to drive a lower average rent, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
The unit size for the subject property it would be fair to say it would be smaller than the rent comparables provided to.
My notes have it that, the gross floor area per unit is 1,005 square feet, whereas two of the comparables have 900 and some odd.
Right. So that and two of them are 1656. So that would encompass all common areas, correct? The gross floor area?
You know what, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how they calculated it, whether they just divided by, sorry.
That's okay. I believe it is. And I don't mean to belabor this, and I know it's probably not entirely fair, but these are all standard market apartments as
Yes.
well, correct? Yes. So they wouldn't typically have a large degree of common area. Is that fair?
I haven't looked at any of them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are, and we have the same cap rate of 5%, and this is all model driven.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bus, any questions of the assessor?
Well, doing the calculation, it seems to me that the gross floor area comes from the number on the first page, just the gross floor area, 135,736 divided by 135 suites. Would you think that this area, I think Mr. Smith was alluding to, has larger, this building would have larger common area and smaller suites? Is that possible?
I haven't been to the apartment buildings, and I'm not sure, but I thought some of these were 55 plus, so I'm not sure what the common area amounts were. I didn't write that down.
And this is a seniors building?
This is assisted living.
Assisted living. So again, it's really difficult to figure out the rents for this building.
Yes.
But you haven't adjusted the capitalization rate at all for the fact that it's assisted living there.
It's model.
That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bus. Lynn, any questions?
So the rents in assisted living apartments, are they for an individual person? Are they adjusted in any way based on income of the individual renter?
I don't know.
I'm just looking at the rents themselves, and the average rent seems pretty low for assisted living. Assisted living would typically also include meals and that sort of thing, right? Do you know for sure? Yeah, that's okay.
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if that's also influenced by being owned by a nonprofit.
Okay. And your comparables are not assisted living, or they're just straight?
They're not assisted living. I thought I wrote it down, but I guess I didn't. I thought that there was a seniors, I'm not not sure which of them, I thought there was two of them that were seniors, like 55 plus
Okay,
buildings, but
not sure.
I'm,
So this assisted living then built in with regard to your cap rates, it really doesn't matter what sort of apartment type it is. It's just all within your same cap rates.
yes.
All multifamily reflected in the same cap rate across the city, regardless of type of multifamily. Okay, thank you. That's all, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Ms. Martins, what we've got here is an assisted living complex that includes, I guess they've got a large kitchen, large dining area that provides meals for all the occupants. Is that right? I'm just looking at the income and expense statement here, and it's saying that the rent of 3.77 million includes housekeeping, probably they clean the suites once a week if required, I guess. There's probably nurses on staff, 24 hours a day. It says a health resource. And that there's recreation and meals provided. I would suspect that the individual suites don't have appliances in them, but maybe they allow them a toaster and a microwave. So it's a care facility.
In
Independent.
that direction, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, okay. So we probably got smaller suites, not fully supplied with not all of them fully supplied with appliances. Maybe even restrictions for fire code purposes, depending on the capability of the tenants. Would that be fair too?
But they're.
Sorry, I'm crossing
they're-
over, but,
I can go through all that in the.
okay, yeah. So it's not a normal apartment block,
No.
but it's being assessed as being compared to
Well,
an income producing apartment.
yes.
building, yeah.
That being said, other 55 plus apartments also have increased spaces for people to
Right.
dine. A lot of them also have kitchens that provide meals.
Yeah.
Whether you choose to do it in your apartment or you choose to go and eat jointly. So this is a common thing that they do.
But this is more of a care facility.
This is assisted living, not.
Yeah, different
But-
levels of care, I guess, but,
And it's also, for tax purposes, it's also treated as, not as a residential, it's treated
Yeah,
as an
institutional.
institutional property,
Right.
in part to balance that out.
oh, okay. Yeah, so it's a different classification.
Yes, different liability.
Doesn't pay the school, not responsible for school, or not liable for school taxes.
Mhm.
Okay, and on the income and expense, I guess there's some kind of grants coming from somewhere, so grant program on page 11,
Mhm.
resident services, private residence, another category, okay. Okay. All right, I guess Mr. Smith will tell us the whole tale that's going on here, all right? Okay, that's all my
Be as
questions.
concise as I can. These are always complicated. So I'll just clear up a few points to start with. If you flip to my page number 7, it gives you a breakdown of individual unit types, the number of those units, and the size of those units. So we have a total of 135 units. All of them range between 562 square feet and a maximum of 840 square feet. So they are small units, smaller than the average comparable size on the market for a market rental apartment. Now, of those 135 units, fully 52 of them, 59 of them, I guess it is, are 562 square feet. And then there's another 12 that are 567, 4 that are 557. So these are small units in comparison to the market, and would, of course, in the normal market situation, drive a lesser rent with reflective of the size of space that one would be renting. The page number 7 as well does also discuss the build-out of these units. So each unit does have a living room and a kitchen, which is really a kitchenette. Shared laundry facilities on the floor. The kitchenettes are a smaller size refrigerator and a microwave typically, with only very few of them having an actual range stove for the occupants, for safety reasons, obviously, given the cohort that is occupying these properties. So hopefully that clears up some of the issues. I'll just back up a bit here. The issue with assisted living properties is always the fact that it's a business. They are providing services to all of these occupants. So arriving at a fair rental rate and expenses, etc., is not simply looking at what the property generates and what the full out expenses are on it. It's a matter of removing the expenses that are related to the business component of that property, that being supplying meals to the residents and any of the other services and associated costs that are included in the expenses. We follow the same format that is essentially accepted by other market participants here in presentation before the board of revision for quite a number of cycles now. So this is nothing new. We're following the same pattern with updates for the current valuation date in what we provide to you. So if you look at the actual income and expense for the property and the estimated gross potential suite income of 3.8 million versus the 1,590,000 that we project for it, or the 1.6 million or 1,676,000 that the city projects, you can see that the business component is there, and we are not examining that. So the revenue that is generated by the property overall is not to be considered. So what we do is project what a fair rental rate would be for these units on the open market, given the limitations of the units and size of them, etc. What would a market participant pay for rent for those units? And we remove the additional expenses that are associated with any service provision to the occupants based on it being an assisted living facility, to arrive at a net operating income that is reflective of market. So normalized rent, normalized expenses, and then capitalized at an appropriate rate. So that's the background as far as the approach. And again, this is standard across the market here. If you look at the photos beginning on page number 2, you can see that this is some exterior shots, and we provide a few shots of some of the common areas. Obviously a very large dining room. There is a certain amount of office space, not a large degree, but they have to manage the facility. A large kitchen, and then there are additional areas such as library, games room, things like that would not be present in a normal standard market situation. So all of these spaces are there and present, and do add to the gross area of the building, but not to the size of the suites, obviously. So the suites are considerably smaller. The build out of the units is very functional. It's as shown, easily cleanable, etc. It's not low end, it's not high end. It's fairly utilitarian, I guess would be a good way of putting it. The description is further on page number 7. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but just to illustrate again, the common areas, we have reception lobby area, a little office administration area as well, dining room, a separate private dining room, a multi-purpose room, the kitchen for provision of meals. There is a guest room, a lounge, a hairstylist room, etc. So there's a significant amount of common area that would not be present in normal situation. It's located exactly where the other one is, on Lindenwood Drive East, as shown in the aerial on page number 9. And now we can move into the valuation section of our report today. So beginning on page number 11, we have a bit of a description of vacancy for standard market apartments versus a breakdown by by average rent. So these are assisted living properties. You're looking at say $2,500 to $3,000 and $3,000 and up. The vacancy rates in those are obviously higher than the normal market. That being said, we're treating it as a normal market apartment, so we're not asking for that additional vacancy that they will have in these facilities, as turnover can certainly obviously be a bit higher. Moving on to what we're actually going to attribute in rental rates to the facility. And again, this methodology has been proved out by numerous market participants before the board here and at the municipal board as well. We present comparable market properties that are standard market apartments, relatively recent. And because of the size of these suites in subject property, there are no direct comparables out there of newly built apartments that would have 550 square foot units. So we have done a breakdown by rent per square foot for these properties on for the different unit types, 1 and 2 bedrooms obviously being the main. Now, if you go through the list, you can see the breakdown of each individual one. The average is shown at the bottom of that chart at the top of page 13, with 1 bedrooms being $10.80 at $1.49 per square foot, 2 bedrooms being $14.55 at $1.52 per square foot, and 3 beds at $17.40 at $1.41. Now we have 1 and 2 bedroom units. We have applied a bit of a premium to that, in that we have a range of between $1.29 and $1.72 for 1 beds, and $1.18 to $1.64 for the 2 beds. So we have utilized a per square foot rental rate of $1.50 per square foot for the 1 bedroom units and $1.45 per square foot for the 2 bedroom units. This is moving up from our valuation in the last cycle for the subject property and comparable properties. So we have increased our rental rates that we're assigning. If you use this per square foot breakdown, it results in rents of $8.36 to $12.18 for the 1 beds and $11.98 to $12.60 for the 2 bedroom units. And if you flip over to my page number 14, it lays it out much more neatly and gives you the breakdown in coming down to the potential rent of $1,590,540. So happy to answer questions on that when we get to it, but that is, again, a standardized way of arriving at a fair rental rate for these small units with kitchenettes, essentially. We've also added in additional income of the parking revenue for the subject property in into our valuation, as well as the proportional guest suite income. Moving on to the expense side, we use the same 2.4% vacancy rate that the city uses in our valuation. The operating expenses for the subject property, if you look at the income and expense detail provided at the back, both 475 and 490 are treated as one operating unit by the ownership, so there is no individual breakdown between 475 and 490. So in order to fairly assess this, we've broken it down on a per suite basis. So we've assigned the proportional amount to 475 based on the 135 suites that they have out of the total of 214 suites that 475 and 490 have. So you have a little over 63% of the expenses being attributed to 475 and the balance to 490. That's the fairest way to do the breakdown. Looking at the 3-year stabilized history, you can see how we have stabilized the income. We've used 5% for property management, obviously a significant change from what is attributed by the ownership itself. We've made adjustments where necessary, and in many cases it is the 3-year average that made the most sense with the variability of the expenses. Actual property tax, and for repair and maintenance, we've assigned a rate of $1,250 per suite. The ownership does indicate that they get a significant amount of wear in these units with wheelchairs and walkers and things like that. They get a lot of repainting that's required both in common areas and in the units themselves. So we used a repair and maintenance allowance of $1,250 per suite. Certainly within market norms and well under what the actual property has as repair and maintenance, which would encompass obviously kitchens, commercial kitchen, etc. We've also reduced the utilities by $5,000 based on what the size of the commercial kitchen and what it would typically cost to operate that, feeling that would be more attributable to a business expense. So there's the deduction on the utilities. And we have included a payroll amount for a property of this size of $80,000, which would certainly be reflective of a market norm. That would, in the actual expenses, would be reflected in as shown in the property management admin. So we've reduced that to the norm of 5% and then added in payroll down at the bottom there. So what these expenses don't include are activity expenses, automobile expenses, depreciation, equipment repairs, food, staffing, small wares, repairs and maintenance. Anything to do with the business component of the operation of this has been removed from the expenses as provided. Moving on from there to cap rates, you've heard me go through the discussion on cap rates here already. We have our trends as shown by C.B. Richard Ellis for seniors housing, specifically probably more related to assisted living, certainly having higher cap rates assigned to it. You can see the trend over normal market apartments with cap rates being higher. You can see on page number 17 the same discussion that we went through on the last one. What would you attribute to assisted living facilities in 2015 for a normal deal? Asked to the main market participants, we get a range of 6.5% to 7.25% in the 4 main markets in Canada back in 2015. Now, that's great, but that's treating it as assisted living. So we're not asking for what would you buy this for as an assisted living. We're asking for what cap rate would you use as a market apartment given the constraints that the property has. So we then present the Colliers and CBRE cap rates historically 2016 through 2018. We can see the spreads there of roughly 5 to 6%, 5.5 to 6% at CBRE. And sitting back, looking at the subject property, we have an assisted living facility. So you have very large common area on the main floor that isn't revenue generating as a market apartment. There is expenses with regard to heating and cleaning that will add to your expense ratio, overall expenses for the property. You're buying a property that isn't a standard market apartment. So you've got rental units that are on the small size that don't have full-scale kitchens that would certainly be in lesser demand, certainly drive lower rental rates and probably higher vacancy rates, I would suggest. And as an assisted living facility, which we're not treating it as, there is the business component. So there's a greater degree of risk in buying a business, that being staffing and equipment and all the other items that come along with that. So with the range typically being 5 to 6%, taking into account these factors, we've used 6% in our analysis. And on page number 20, this is summarized. We have the rental income based on market comps on a per square foot basis to accommodate for the small size, 2.4% vacancy, stabilized expense history at $899, and capitalized at 6%, we come to a market value of $11,350,000, or $51,000, pardon me. The property is currently under appeal at the municipal board for the past cycle, as well as 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
And happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any question of the appellant?
Yes, please. Now, you used you did your calculations to have a market rent available. Is it fair to say that amenities in buildings can influence rent to be higher, such as a gym facility or any of those type of additional facilities for people?
Yes, I would agree, and certainly in some circumstances, if you had a gym or a pool or something of that nature, that might generate a greater rent being achieved. I don't know that the amenities here would necessarily fall into that category.
Now, we've established that the individual units are on the small side, and that the common areas are large, and with the expectation that people won't be just sitting alone in their tiny rooms, that they will be going down for dinner and they will be using the common areas to socialize on more of a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So did you factor the increase in use of the common areas into the market rents?
Well, what we did as far as attributing the market rents specifically is look at recently built product of comparable build-out and or better in some cases, to see what's being achieved on the market for good quality recent construction. And in many cases there are amenities that go along with those buildings. So that is what has driven our rent. So we're looking at looking at what is being achieved on the market for newer, good quality construction. So I don't think there would be necessarily an increase in rent based on the amenities that, and the circulation that they might have in this facility beyond what we're suggesting.
Okay, has there been any recent damage or problems or issues that, to the building itself?
Recent damage?
Anything that requires, that would reduce the value significantly?
Structural or
Yeah.
roofing, or I did not have anything specific reported to me, but again, we're looking at the normalized state, so, you know, over time, there are obviously issues with every building.
Okay, is the market on assisted living, is there any reason for us to have a distinct decrease in value over the past few years on this property? For the market, is assisted, or properties that are assisted living properties dropping in value, or is there anything that would influence that?
I'm just trying to correctly summarize, so you're asking whether assisted living properties have gone down in value?
Yes.
Not specifically, no, but to reframe that question, my valuation of the property has consistently gone up over the cycles. The decision that has come out is under appeal, et cetera, so.
Okay, because from the decision for the 2012 value, this is a significant decrease in value from that. So I'm wondering why this property would be valued below the 2012 assessed value.
I don't have the 2012 value with me here today, unfortunately. I don't specifically remember what it is, but I'm not directly relating it to that one. I'm not saying it's gone down. That was a negotiation at the municipal board between the city and myself, and was an agreement essentially arrived at.
Sorry, I was under the impression it was a decision.
No, it wasn't. It was an agreement.
Okay, sorry, my
That's
notes
okay.
said it was a decision.
That's fine.
Sorry, no other questions.
Thank you. Lynn, any questions of the appellant?
I have no questions.
Mr. Buss?
A couple. It's a hard one to value, but let me ask you, would you agree that this, although the suites are smaller, it's being masonry construction, it's better construction than your average wood frame apartment building, 2-3-story apartment building?
Sure, absolutely. The structure itself, in terms of being concrete and steel, would be better than a wood frame, but that wouldn't change the rental rate that one would achieve on smaller units without kitchens.
And would you classify this as a good location?
I would.
Thank you, that's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buss, and I have no questions. Ms. Martin's requirement for summary?
Thank
You
you.
good, Mr. Smith?
No, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes 475 Lindenwood Drive East. Next property in the docket is 490 Lindenwood Drive East, and we're dealing with a 2020 appeal, realty appeal.
May I interject just briefly?
Of course.
May I ask for a 5-minute recess?
Of course.
I just need to cover my part.
Sure. Yeah, we'll recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kelsey, thanks. I will call the hearing back to order, and we're gonna start with 490 Lindenwood Drive East. Ms. Martins, when you are ready, please.
This is roll number 100006. 6446900. This is 490 Lindenwood Drive East. The assessed value is $10,730,000. This is classified as an institutional property, and the liability status is taxable school exempt. This building was built in 2007. It has 4 stories. The gross floor area is 86,608 square feet. On page 3, we have some comparables, and I'm sorry, the subject property again on there is 475 Lindenwood. And on page 4, we've got the income workup. We have 79 suites. We have the rent for the suites at $1,020 per month. This gives us a gross potential income of $966,960, with a vacancy loss at 2.4% and the expenses at 43.15% and capitalization rate at 5%. That's how we get our estimated value of $10,730,000. After that, we have our capitalization rate page, and we do have the mailer on here as well. This is an assisted living property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions.
Mr. Buss?
This property is very similar to the one we just dealt with at 475, is that correct?
Yes, same
So-
ownership, same,
Similar type of operation.
yes.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
Lynn, any questions?
I have no questions.
And I have no questions either. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Okay, great. So as stated, it's very similar to the other one. This is built in 2007 versus 2003, very similar in age. They're not brand new, but they're not old either. We're going back more than a decade there. 79 total units, again, 2/3 of them being 1-bedroom units versus 2 bedrooms. That's on the market level. Typically what you see in product being built is obviously less 1 bedrooms than 2 bedrooms. More, it's usually almost the reverse of that. 1/3 1 bedrooms, 2/3 2 beds, as you drive more revenue from the 2 beds for the amount of space. And the property itself, I'm not going to go through all of the detail here. It is under appeal for the last cycle at the municipal board, and I believe we also reached an agreement on some prior appeal year in recent times. The units are very similar. There are some photos here. You do have, again, lots of common area, commercial kitchen, dining room, etc. The build-out is shown there as well. Again, very serviceable, not higher-end finishes, but not the bottom end either. We've approached the valuation in the exact same way. The units, again, are on the smaller side. If you look at my page number 15, you can see that we have 39 out of 79 units at 609 square feet. So again, on the smaller side, and then we move up from there. For some of the others, we've applied the same per square foot rental rate for the 1 and 2 bedrooms as we did in the last valuation for 475 Lindenwood. So $1.50 per square foot for the 1 beds and $1.45 per square foot for the 2 beds. And that results in the projected annual revenue of $1,007,867. To this, we've added parking income as well as a proportional amount of guest suite income as well. We have deferred to the 2.4% vacancy rate as used by the city. Again, the operating expenses for this property, they are accounted for as a single entity by the ownership, so we have divided them proportionally based on the suite count. The subject property of 490 accounts for just under 37% of the expenses, so we've assigned that amount of the expenses for the appropriate years to the subject property in doing our stabilization. If you look at the top of page 16, you can see the 3-year history and how we've stabilized the expenses for that property. Again, we're dealing with property that has higher common area than a standard market apartment. So we will have associated heating and lighting and maintenance costs with those areas. We used 5% standard market rate for property management, significant reduction there. Repairs and maintenance at $12.50 per suite per year. We've reduced utilities, again, by $5,000 based on the operation of the kitchen and what proportion of that would be attributable to operating at what the utilities would be for that operating at as a kitchen to provide meals to the occupants of the building, which would be a business expense. And then you can see the payroll expense that we have added in for a normalized staffing level and the items that would not be included in our expense. The capitalization rate, I will not repeat what I have gone through here. We've used the same 6% capitalization rate in our valuation. And this is all summarized on page number 21. So based on market-driven rental rate on a per square foot basis, actual expenses stabilized for the reference year, 2.4% vacancy and a 6% cap rate, we come to a market value of $7,658,000. Happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martin, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Buss?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. You know, I have one first and
Sure.
I'm
You're smiling.
Yeah, I know, yeah, I don't wanna get into it too much, but, it's this question of using, combined expenses and then dividing them, apportioning expenses to one building
Mhm.
from a one income and expense statement for, is it 3 buildings?
2 buildings.
2 buildings, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the 2 life lease facilities, of which there's another one that we're not doing today for some reason, are individually accounted for,
Uh-huh.
but the 2 assisted livings are counted as one unit, and they've always been that way, and it is not in the purview of the city to ask them to entirely change how they run their business.
So we're still arguing about that, are we?
I'm not arguing.
No,
I'm just
sorry, I
saying
mean, it's still in the air,
It's not.
it should be handled.
The most fair way to do it would either be by per square foot or by suite count.
Okay.
And that's how we've done it.
So, as a question, if one building required a new roof, and I don't know if this has got HVACs, and let's say one building requires $5 million in maintenance. When you're doing individual market evaluations, in your way of doing it, you would split $2.5 million to each building?
Well, it would be
For
proportional.
expenses?
It would be
Yeah.
64%
Okay,
and
but-
36%.
Yeah.
But,
Is that
and
fair?
I get your point.
Yeah.
I get your point. But, so building A has a roof repair in this year. Building B has it in some other year too, right?
Yeah, okay.
So it is, I do understand the point, but it is balanced between the 2, unless you have a building in a sinkhole or something
To
like
them,
that.
it doesn't matter because they're doing them together, so it doesn't matter where the roof is on this building or that building, it's an expense. And
Yes.
But my point is, we're looking at individual appeals with individual market
Yes.
valuation of the property.
Understood, but we do also have buildings that are the same use, built 4 years apart by the same organization in the same way, so it's not going to be significantly different, even if they were able to split those costs out, which they're not. So they don't account for them in that manner.
And Ms. Martin, I'm not sure if you have the experience to deal with this, but I'm not trying to open
Are we
Can of
going
worms
to
here,
demand
but-
that they share a roll number, or, because we can't really, this is an operation, they probably also operate the staff. Do the staff just work in one area? Like, they probably,
yeah.
and when they're ordering food, are they ordering, these places are across the street from each other, are they ordering food for one building? It doesn't make sense for us to ask them to incorporate, like, to make sure that all of their expenses are this one and this one.
And yet, correct me if I'm wrong, the
We
income and
asked them to
expense
report it.
statement says that it should be reported individually. And not that I'm trying to open a
Well,
can of worms here, but,
We should have information reported from each, and it shouldn't be, like, there should be some division, whether it's that they divide it. by-
and right now,
Mhm.
the reason I'm asking is last cycle, there was often arguments about it not being, you know where I'm going here, Mr. Smith.
I do absolutely.
And I'm wondering if the department has changed their policy, or we're just not pursuing it today.
Well, we have mailer information, so they've complied by sending mailer information,
On the income, yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So,
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay.
Lovely.
I just wanted to ask. Okay. That was my only question. Okay, that concludes 490 Lindenwood Drive East. Okay. And the last one on the docket is 88 Swindon Way. So we're over in Tuxedo, Old Tuxedo, South Tuxedo. And we're dealing with a 2020 Realty Appeal. Ms. Martin, when you are ready, please.
this is roll number 10006070500. This is 88 Swindon Way. The assessed value is $9,929,000. Its classification is residential 3, and its liability is taxable. We have that building was built in 1988. It is a 6-story apartment building with 63 suites. The land area is 64,688 square feet, and the plan area is 11,076 square feet. The construction class is reinforced concrete frame. If we look on page 3, we have the income workup. We have the average monthly rent per unit at $1,258.07. Gives us a gross potential rent of $951,101. A vacancy rate of 2.4%. We have the expense rate at 46.52% and a cap of 5%, which gives us our $9,929,000. We have some comparables on page 4, and then our cap rate information, and we have a mailer on the back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
Just a moment, sorry.
Sure, no problem. Take your time.
No, I have no questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Buss?
The cap rate, 5%, that's from the 1988 building. Doesn't, when the building's older like that, it doesn't affect the cap rate at all?
This was modeled, so I'm not sure what the cutoff would be for an
Changes.
adjustment for the cap rate,
Because age would generally make a difference in
Yes.
cap rates?
generally. But not sure what the cutoff would be.
Okay. And so this is a co-op?
Yes.
So how does that, do you know how that operates? Does everybody pay market rents or?
I'm not sure how that operates for this one.
Have we got some information on page 7?
It does show what their income is, but I'm not sure about buy-ins or what the amounts would be.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buss. Any questions of the assessor?
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. My only question, Ms. Martins, is class code 80 residential 3, why, as opposed to 60 in residential 2 is it because of the co-op classification, or? Maybe it's just the classification purposes only, so it
It
doesn't.
could be the zoning. I wasn't, I've got the zoning for it if you want me to look deeper, but this area has more, like the neighborhood has more residential,
Right.
multi-family units, so it's
Yeah.
more of an apartment area, so it could be because of that. I'm not saying it definitely is.
Yeah,
Because the other ones that we've had there's less housing around them, so they've got different neighborhood zonings.
okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Smith, when you're ready, please.
Yes, thank you. I apologize, I forgot to mention something when we were discussing the other two, so just ever so briefly. It was pointed out that there was an exemption on those properties, and I just wanted to make clear that we're just dealing with market value and not with taxation on those two prior properties that had the exemption on
Okay.
them. Jumping back into Swindon Way, the property, as shown, it is a cooperative, originally built in 1988, and I do have a couple of typos here, so I will point those out as we go along. The property rights on page number 1, it is leasehold estate. The Carpathia Housing Co-op does not outright own the property. It is owned by Manitoba Housing and Rehabilitation Corporation. They own the land, and the Carpathia Housing Co-op built the structure on it and leases the land from them until 2039 under an agreement with MHRC. And also under that agreement, 20%, a minimum of 20% of the units in the development have to be assigned to low-income renters as part of that agreement. So the actual ownership is leasehold estate by Carpathia Housing, with MHRC being the beneficial owner. Pardon me. It is a total of 63 units, 17 one-beds, 36 two-beds, and then slightly unusual, we have 10 three-bedroom units for families, basically. It is a nonprofit entity, so they are not driven by profit, but they must break even, and they do charge market level rental rates. If we look at the photos of the property beginning on page 2, you can see the exterior, the parking lot, the lobby, so you can see the vintage of the build-out. Essentially, very little has changed since 1988. There have been very few renovations to the individual units. You can see the original cabinetry and that in the kitchens, in the bathrooms, et cetera. So that is the vintage of building that we're looking at. So there is certainly a significant degree of what one would call deferred maintenance in that way, in that very little has been replaced unless there's breakage, et cetera. The carpets in common areas have been there for some time. It's not in, it's certainly not in terrible condition or anything, but the improvements certainly are overdue for replacement and or renovation in most cases. So moving on from the photographs of the units, we can get into the valuation itself. The page number 12 just has a little bit on cooperative housing description. We can move into the valuation on page 13. The typo I was going to point out is at the bottom. It's not West Boyne Park, it's Carpathia Housing. That was simply not changed. The figures there are the actual Carpathia and are shown in the addenda materials, so you're free to check those and make sure they're accurate. The housing charges that Carpathia charges are shown there: $850 for a 1-bedroom, $963 for a 2-bedroom, and then $1073 to $1131 for the 3-bedroom units, coming to $721, $656. Now, looking at the build out of those units, etc., comparing them to some similar properties on page number 14, you can see that they do fall within the same range as the properties provided there on page number 14. So we believe that the in-place rental rates are reflective of market rent for that property. We've also included the parking income as well as laundry income, and for the subject property, under the agreement with CMHC, they also kick in an amount every year, which for 2017 was $97,413. So we have accounted for that revenue as well. If we move on to page number 15, we can look at the expenses. We've used the same vacancy rate. The actual expenses for 3 years are shown on page 15, including how we stabilize them. Our stabilization includes a management fee, which is not included in their expenses in any of those line items. So that increases the total expenses to a normalized level for market, as obviously you have to have property management. The total expenses come to $413,527 based on the actuals for the property. The R&M that we've used for the property, again, they're a co-op. They try and keep all of their expenses down, so they tend to defer and or not maintain things as promptly as one might in a normal market situation, so their actual R&M was relatively low. Based on my inspection of the property and what I saw, it would be a normal market rate of $1,500 a suite for R&M, so that's what I've assigned as far as that expense item. Moving on to capitalization rate, much the same commentary as we've had in some of these other circumstances. Obviously, this is an older property. It is a cooperative property based on operating at a break-even point. The discussion with regard to social and affordable housing at the top of page 16 is shown. I refer to an article by, or a book by Mr. Richard Polton, who's an expert in this field, valuation and market studies for affordable housing. States, developing a market-derived cap rate for an income-restricted property begins with an analysis of the available rates for similar unrestricted properties. Then these rates are adjusted based on the risk factors that an investor would consider in developing a cap rate. The result is a cap rate based on market factors and associated risks. In the final analysis, property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, the overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. So that's a bit of background for you. If you look at the risk factors for properties such as this, you have occupants that are in under leases that reflect their low income nature in 20% of the units. And the rents are reflective of what they're achieving, what they are achieving there. So reflective of what they're actually renting there. So you've got a property that's a bit older, furnishings are older, etc. You're not going to achieve a higher end of rent on a property such as that. There's significant capital investment that would be required in changing furnishings in both in common areas and in the suites themselves. So a significant adjustment would be needed to be made for that in looking at any purchase. As well, on disposition, you're buying a property that would then come with the residents in on the lease rates that they're paying, so you would not instantly be able to go in there and adjust them to what you feel market rates would be if you were to renovate the property, because they're in there on leases going forward. So there's a significant amount of risk that would be present on social housing such as this that is not necessarily present on standard market apartments. So looking at the same market evidence that we've provided in the previous hearings today, we've applied a cap rate of 6% to account for the risk factors that would be present for an investor buying this property. And this produces a market value of $6,831,000. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
Just one. When we're talking about the expenses and how they are lower than market, but you've added a few things, you've added in there as though they were more equal with market, so you've increased the expenses a little. But if the expenses were actually, if they were maintaining the properties as market properties and had the expenses of market properties, then would they perhaps command higher value in the long run? So we've got a reduced.
As in, would they achieve more rent?
Well, as in the property, if it was properly maintained and that therefore more expensive, then the value at the end would be higher, as opposed to if your expenses were closer to actual, then the actual rents with the actual expenses would be more reflective of an actual value, as opposed to the actual expenses, the inflated expenses with actual rents, and that brings the value disproportionately. I just, in my head, it made sense.
So
Because if the expenses were treated as they actually were, like if they actually put in the maintenance, if they made sure to replace the carpets more frequently, or whatever it was to maintain market expenses, then in the long run, they would, the whole property would have more value.
I certainly understand your point, and it's, there's validity to that, certainly if you maintain property to the tip-top standard, then you get the tip-top price. That's certainly not always the case in many instances. And looking at the subject property, yes, there's more deferred maintenance. However, even our adding on additional expense for R&M, which is where that would come in, to $1,500 a suite, still only brings us up to $413. On the income side, to make any adjustment, we've obviously included the CMHC revenue that they receive as well. So on top of the rental rate that's paid, they have that revenue. So I think there's a balance there and that it is accounted for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Lynn, any questions?
I have no questions.
Mr. Buss?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smith, looking on page 20 of your workup, the CMHC revenue of $97,000 approximately,
Mhm.
that would be in support of the low rental portion, do you think?
Correct.
Okay. And your comparables are, I believe, all in the north end, or?
Well,
The
they're
rental
similar, they're similar style of properties.
They're housing co-ops, or?
They're housing co-ops.
Oh.
It's not, actually, the last two are not.
Okay.
The top two are, the last two are not.
So, just so I understand, these are run with, the rent is determined by the cost of running the building, is that right? It's nonprofit?
Yes, it is, in that they're designed to operate it as a nonprofit. They need to, either have a small surplus or break even.
Yeah.
But to do that, they essentially have to charge market rents for the most part, or have a subsidy that takes them up to what market
Okay.
rent would be, so the CMHC essentially accounts for that.
Do you think, in your opinion, that there's or accounting for the fact that this building is sitting in South Tuxedo?
I do see where it is, and I do recognize that, but again, you're buying, you have this building and the identical building beside it that's a standard market apartment, and that one has been run as a normal market apartment from the same time frame. Probably not as much deferred maintenance. They're not the same amount of hair on the deal as far as low income residents having the right to remain in their suites on the
I mean, this
deals
building
that
is
they have,
surrounded by
right?
$400,000 condos, right? Across the street, and,
Those would be condos though.
yeah. But I guess
Individual I do know it's in Tuxedo, and we all know what Tuxedo is in Winnipeg, but you're not buying a normal apartment block within Tuxedo. If we were, then that would
Okay.
obviously change my
Okay.
perception there.
Okay, thank you. I have no other questions. Ms. Martin's requirement for summary?
No, thank
Okay,
you.
Mr. Smith?
No, thank you.
Okay, that concludes 88 Swindon Way, and that concludes our hearing for today. Thank you very much, both of you. And if you're from us as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you didn't get a ticket.